How do you think people in Jamaica are going to react to Operation Miracle? How do you think people in South Boston are going to react to cheap oil? Yeah. I presume they'll like it, just like most of the Venezuelan people seem to like it. So will it be a model for them? Yeah, very possible. That's what the U.S. is worried about. Kind of like Cuba, danger of successful defiance and the Castro idea of taking matters into our own hands, which can appeal to other people elsewhere who have similar needs. Actually, the same is true in Vietnam. Again, we're not allowed to think it, because we're supposed to think orders are. It was a benign effort to defend South Vietnam, and it was a mistake, and it cost too much. That's not what happened. I mean, the U.S. invaded South Vietnam under Kennedy. Straight, outright invasion. In 1962, expanded to the rest of Indochina. And the primary reason, which we know well about from internal documents, again, it's a free country, the reason was they were afraid that Vietnam would be a virus. It would undergo successful development, which would be infect others, maybe Thailand onto Indonesia, which is important. Maybe even compel Japan to accommodate to independent Southeast Asia. I mean, that would mean that the United States would have lost the Pacific War, World War II, which was fought to prevent that. And they're going to lose the World War II in 1950. So yeah, you had to prevent that from happening in Vietnam. And they did. The U.S. achieved its major objectives. Vietnam was destroyed. It's not going to be a model to anybody. And then the U.S. could pull out. The comparisons of Iraq to Vietnam are ridiculous. The U.S. can't destroy Iraq and pull out. It's ludicrous. I mean, they're not producing lettuce and pickles. Okay? So when you move it back into the real world, the Vietnam-Iraq comparison is absurd. And furthermore, in Vietnam, the U.S. fundamentally achieved its objectives. It's called a U.S. failure, but that's because the intellectual culture here is so super jingoistic that if you don't achieve your maximal aims, it's a failure. You only achieve your basic aims, it's a failure. Okay? I mean, the maximal aims were to turn it into a client state, Philippines or something. Okay, they didn't achieve that. But they achieved their major aims. It's not a model to anyone, no infection. So, in fact, that's understood in planning circles. Indonesia in 1965 had a horrendous military coup backed by the United States, which they killed, and Britain, and which they killed, nobody knows, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million people, mostly landless peasants. The place was smashed, destroyed what there was of a democratic system. There was total euphoria in the West, unconcealed because they were so gleeful. Indonesia was opened up to exploitation as a lot of wealth. People like Paul Wolfowitz, who's called the idealist in chief now, he was the strongest supporter of General Suharto, the murderous tyrant who ran Indonesia until 1998, always with U.S. support. Wolfowitz loves him. He was the ambassador. But it was fine. They instituted a brutal regime which allowed its resources to be exploited. Well, George Bundy, who was the National Security Advisor under Kennedy and Johnson, in later years, in retrospect, said plausibly, he said in 1965 we should have pulled out of Vietnam. Okay, why? Because Indonesia was now inoculated against the virus. They had a vicious massacre, which the CIA called one of the major mass murders in the 20th century. They compared it to Stalin and Hitler and Mao. So yes, it was carried off and it worked. So there's not going to be any infection in Indonesia. So what are we wasting our time in Vietnam? That was his retrospective judgment. Well, they teach that in elementary school if we took our freedom seriously.